Cleantech Live came about at the beginning of this year as a way to begin to connect more with our audience in a face-to-face environment, and to really start to have an opportunity and create an opportunity for people like us, people interested in sustainability, in people who believe that solving climate change is both possible and urgent, and create opportunities for us to connect with each other, to support each other in the work that we're doing, and to learn about the different solutions being developed. So we've had so far 2 Cleantech Live events. The first was in May, where Zoheb talked about his work at Mobility House and the technology that's called vehicle-to-grid technology. And then last month, we heard from our friends Eric Parker and Adria Wilson over at Beam Project on the topic of cleantech crowdfunding. And when asked the audience of which non-energy sector they were most curious to learn more about, sustainable agriculture was the most popular response. So it so happened that our friend Arian, who's going to be speaking today, had already planned to join us here today to talk about his work at Bountiful. And so I'll just kind of run us through a quick agenda, and then we'll go ahead and send it over to Arian to get started with the talk. So yeah, so the way these Cleantech Live event works, if you haven't been here with us before, we do a 10 to 15 minute talk from a sustainability or cleantech professional on the problems that they're trying to solve in their work and the solutions that they're developing. Then we'll open it up. Arian will directly open it up to the audience for a Q&A, where we encourage and welcome you to type your questions into the chat. And the beautiful thing about asking questions is that the other people in the audience get to begin to see things that they may not have seen before. Questions, as we all know, are so important in the learning process. And for us to be able to help actually each other learn through the questions that we are asking, I think is a really, is one of the sort of goals of this sort of event. So we really encourage you to ask questions. And then we round out the final half of this event with small group discussions in Zoom's breakout rooms. And I'll tell you a little bit more of that when we kind of step into that portion of the event. So again, so grateful for you being here today. And with that, we will send it over to Arian to get started with the talk.
Great. Thank you, Cameron. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And please let me know if everybody can see or hear me fine.
Mm-hmm. All good.
All good, perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining this Cleantech Live session. Thank you for taking the time out of your lunch break to listen to us talk about sustainable agriculture. As Cameron mentioned, there was a lot of interest in our last session about sustainable agriculture, and I'm glad to be presenting in this session. So what I'm hoping to do during this conversation is to highlight the importance of agriculture and how we need agriculture in our fight against climate change. Second, I would like to talk about the challenges that are stopping a lot of us to pay attention or actually make progress in sustainable agriculture. And then I'll transition over to talk a little bit about Bountiful and what we're doing at Bountiful to help that effort when it comes to sustainable agriculture. And I'm going to be leaving everybody with our vision for the future, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So with that, I would like to start by mentioning that agriculture is a great contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. If you just look at agriculture itself, so that's on-farm emissions, that's about 12% of our global greenhouse gas emissions. If we expand the scopes and look at agriculture, forestry, and land use, which a lot of times we cannot separate those things from each other, that chunk increases to 24% of global emissions. And to give everybody perspective, here are all the other emissions that we have to deal with when it comes to clean tech and sustainability. And a lot of us working in clean tech and or have been worked in clean tech for a long time, we tend to view clean tech and sustainability mainly through these chunks: electricity production through renewables, transportation, trying to electrify that transportation, and buildings. But by doing that, we miss these two really big chunks, which is industry and agriculture, which are also industries that are very hard to decarbonize. So hopefully after this talk, maybe I'll be able to convince more people that we should be paying more attention to other sectors such as agriculture. So that's what we'll be focusing on, that 24% of our emissions. And just to put things in another perspective, if we go beyond just the farm level, if we look at our entire food supply chain, so that's anything starting at the farm, the transportation of the food, processing, refrigeration, everything to the groceries, to the consumer's hand, the entire food supply chain contributes to 37% of our global gas emissions. That's the single largest contributor to GHG emissions. So it's true that this talk is mainly focused on agriculture, and we do a lot of work in agriculture, but at the end of the day, it's the entire food system that needs a disruption. And we can't win the fight against climate change without taking this sector into account. And just to provide everybody with another set of statistics, we need, so to stay on our path for fighting climate change and staying under 2 degrees Celsius temperature rise, this is what needs to be done over the next 9 years to 2100. And I just wanted to highlight the sector that we will be focusing on today, which is agriculture and land use. And one of the major benefits of ag is that it can not only go down to zero, but it can actually turn negative. So it's the only sector that can help us sequester carbon at a low cost. And I think before we started chatting, before we started the session, somebody mentioned that we need to sequester that carbon. That's true, we need to do it, but the agriculture needs it, because the more carbon we have in the soil, the higher yields we're going to get. And as we all know, the population is increasing. Our yield has been flattening, and our only hope is to increase fertilizer application. But there is hope that with sequestering carbon, that extra carbon in the soil will increase and yield increases. So hopefully after this few starting PowerPoints or slides, everybody's convinced that ag is important, ag sustainability is important. But the question is, why less, a few of us care about it, why less has been done in terms of ag sustainability compared to the renewables and other sectors of clean tech. And to dive deeper into that, I'm going to propose three challenges that we think needs to overcome in order for ag sustainability to happen or become a real thing. The first challenge is the fact that the environmental footprint of our food is often overlooked. Even as the most environmentally conscious people, we tend to focus on certain aspects of clean tech, mainly renewables, electric vehicle battery storage. Those are the things that a lot of us might think on a day-to-day basis as clean tech. But not a lot of us might think about the environmental sustainability or the footprint that our food system or the food that we eat every day has on the environment. And to put things in perspective, I actually went through an exercise and put my lifestyle through the Cool Climate calculator that UC Berkeley has put together, just to get a sense of what's my carbon footprint. And these are the numbers that I got. The y-axis shows the tons of CO2 that my lifestyle is emitting every year. And not surprisingly, because I already knew this information, the food that I consume contributes most to my GHG emission or my carbon footprint. It's true that I can buy an electric vehicle or buy a heat pump water heater for my house, but what can really make the biggest difference is I just focus on the food that I'm consuming, be more aware of where it's coming from, how it's grown, and what's the environmental footprint associated with it. So yeah, the first challenge, we need to pay more attention to our food and our food system. So the second challenge, which all these two challenges tying together, is there is a lot of isolated sustainability efforts within the industry, but none of those efforts provide quantitative information. And we all know if we can't measure something, we cannot manage it. And that's the main challenge with agriculture sustainability. A lot of the labels that you see on food products, a lot of these programs, they are a seal of approval that you've answered a certain number of questions, you're doing certain practices, but it doesn't tell anybody how much that certain practice is actually saving, how that's improving year over year. And without those quantitative information, it's really hard to convince the general public to care more about agricultural sustainability. You can think of, I like to make the analogy with the nutritional facts. We need to know exactly how many calories are in our food products. We need to, as consumers, we need to demand the same type of information when it comes to our environment, when it comes to the environmental sustainability of our food products. Because at the end of the day, we are the ones paying for that product. So we need to demand better information so then we can make better decisions. That's better for us and it's better for the environment and the planet. And lastly, there is no industry-wide consolidated effort to incentivize sustainable practices in the agriculture operations. And we believe at the end of the day that financial incentive should come from the consumers. The consumers should be paying an extra premium on sustainably sourced ingredients, which will then be passed all the way to the farming operation. But because we are so separated from the food supply chain, we are so far removed from the farm, that's been impossible to implement. And that's, without that, none of the other things will happen. If the farmers are not getting incentivized by doing certain practices, or if they're not receiving the premium that a lot of food companies are charging their consumers because they label their product as sustainable, this whole system will break and we'll never have a self-sustaining agricultural sustainability program. So now that we know why ag is important, what the challenges are in unlocking ag sustainability, let's talk a little bit about our Bountiful journey, what our company Bountiful is doing, and how we are tackling this problem. Obviously, this is something that we cannot do alone. We need everybody to be in it together, but I'll just take a little bit of time and talk about ourselves. So Bountiful is a agriculture data analytics company. The main reason the company was started was because our founders realized that farmers in the US lose $11 billion on most valuable crops every year. And the reason for that loss of valuable crops and all those resources is inaccurate forecasting. So if you don't know how much you're going to be producing at the end of the day, it leads to inefficiencies and waste and loss. But we managed to fix that. We used satellite remotely sensed data, climate and weather information, and our agronomic expertise, plus our machine learning and data science capabilities to come up with actionable yield forecasts. So these yield forecast information will then allow everybody in the food system, in the supply chain, and our main focus is on specialty crops. That's why you see almonds and grapes being listed here. It allows everybody in the supply chain to make smarter decisions. Therefore, we change the way that our food supply chain interacts with us. So if the information flow everywhere, starting from the farm all the way to the consumer, is transparent. So nothing gets wasted in the middle because of inefficiencies and inaccurate information and the lack of accurate forecast capabilities. So this was just the beginning, being able to do yield forecasting for specialty crops and introducing efficiencies into our food supply chain. But we can even do more with the information we are collecting. We can not only, so reducing waste was the first step. The second step is that we would like to think that the yield information that we are an expert of could be the holy grail for unlocking ag sustainability. And the main reason that we think that is, think of the growing cycle of a crop, in our case, an almond tree. Oftentimes, it's common practice to maximize the input at the beginning of the season, hoping to get the maximum yield towards the end of the season. But that's not how things actually work. There are so many other factors that are beyond our control, like weather, soil type, all of them, that we have no control over, and that could impact their yield more than the inputs, mainly water and fertilizer in irrigated agriculture like California. So if we have that yield information early enough in the season, we don't have to maximize our inputs anymore. We will optimize that input based on the yield information that we are accurately forecasting. So with that, we can significantly reduce the inputs to our agricultural system while maintaining the same yield, or sometimes increasing our yield if we calculate those inputs just right. So why is this important? Why optimizing inputs such as water and fertilizer is important in ag sustainability? It's because if you look at, again, an industry, ag industry in California, which is mostly irrigated agriculture, and we grow a lot of high value crops, irrigation and nutrient management, which is the water we put on our crop and also the fertilizer that we give to our crop, makes about 60% of the CO2 emissions of irrigated agriculture. So it's very important to manage those two inputs and continually improve and reduce the amount of nutrients and water that we apply to our farms. If we look at other locations where we grow a lot of row crops or we grow a lot of livestock, we can see land use and other metrics become important. But irrigation nutrient management will always be there, will always be the top contributor to agriculture or GHG emissions. So what we've covered so far is that our first step in bringing ag into sustainability is to reduce emissions down to zero by better managing those inputs. But that's not where we're going to stop. We're not done yet. So taking ag emissions down to zero is just the first step. The next step is actually taking those emissions and taking them negative. We need agriculture to start sequestering carbon, or as a lot of you might have heard, we need our agriculture to go from extractive to regenerative. We need regenerative agriculture, meaning that we need to sequester the carbon, take it out of the atmosphere, and put it back into our soil and into the biomass of our plants. And we think, and we are hopeful, that we can also make an impact when it comes to measurement of regenerative agricultural practices. So far, one of the biggest missing links in making agriculture regenerative is actually measuring the progress and measuring the impacts. And just like how we manage to measure or predict yield using remotely sensed data and satellite imagery, we think that instead of taking soil samples from the ground to measure the improvements in soil health and soil carbon, we can do the exact same process that we did for our yield forecast, but for measuring and estimating the carbon content of the soil. The benefit of this is that it will make regenerative agriculture measurement and verification much more scalable, cheaper, and it would eliminate the costly and the labor-intensive process of taking soil samples. We can expand that beyond just soil samples. We've looked into forest restoration. So can we do all of that measurement and verification remotely, which will then open up a lot of doors into these sustainability practices. And I won't go too much into detail of regenerative agriculture. I'd be happy to talk more later, but I think it is the next hot topic in agricultural sustainability. So I would like to just wrap up with some closing remarks about our sustainability vision. So everything that I talked about, and we can't really do one without the other. All of these go hand in hand. Our first goal is to quantify, measure, and then reduce on-farm emissions down to zero. Then take those emissions negative and transition agricultural fields into carbon sink, and find a way to incentivize all of this. Find a way where the money flows from the consumer all the way to the farm so that they can continue doing these sustainability practices. And one last vision that I want to leave everybody with is, I brought up the concept of nutritional facts. We are so used to seeing this information on our food products and on our packages that it's almost it's unusual not to see them on a food product. So we would like to replicate that when it comes to the environmental footprint of our food. Luckily, there has been some efforts within the industry, so not a consolidated effort, but one-off efforts by different brands they're trying to achieve the exact same goal. They're starting to put CO2 labeling on our food products, or how much carbon they're offsetting by certain sustainability practices. But it would be great to see the same type of labeling in a standardized way on every single food product. And we would love to be the one who starts doing that for specialty crops that are grown in California, especially the crops that we have a lot of expertise on, such as grapes, almonds, walnuts, and pistachios. And wouldn't that be great to have a label like this, a sustainability scorecard, which will tell everybody exactly how much water went into your food product, how much nutrient or how much fertilizer was used, and how much CO2 was associated with the food product that you're purchasing. And I think that will change in a lot of ways, change how we approach food purchases. And if we are willing to pay a premium for a sustainably sourced food product, then that's the missing link to self-sustaining this whole process, where going forward, all our farmers will be attracted to sustainability practices because it makes economic sense, and not just that it's only good for the environment. So with that, I don't know if I went over my time. I wasn't keeping track of time, but how am I doing on time?
Ariane, you're doing great. I think this is a perfect time to transition over into the Q&A. And so while everyone is kind of thinking about what questions you might want to ask, I thought maybe I would just kick you off with the question that I had, which was, and maybe you touched on this, but what are some of the specific incentives you think can work for getting buy-in from the farming industry?
Mm-hmm. I mean, so everything that we've seen so far has been one-off grants, whether through the government or whether through one company's sustainability division that they decided to pay an extra premium for certain practices. At the end of the day, we as consumers need to be paying that premium. And I think one of the great questions for this audience would be, would anybody be willing to pay an extra 50 cents per pound on an almond that's sustainably grown? Or how much would that threshold be? Or is it important enough for people who are environmentally conscious to go out of their way, do their research, understand which food products are sustainable and which ones are not, and how much is it worth to pay for that sustainability?
Looks like Cameron Bush had a question. Did you see that one?
I just saw the. So the question is, how do federal policies like the Farm Bill affect the potential for regenerative agriculture to be adopted widely? I don't have a good answer for that right now. I mean, there's still a lot of, I would like to think of regenerative agriculture as fairly new, as there's a lot of talk about regenerative agriculture. It's still something that's evolving, but we do need more government support and more policies to make it happen. But in short, I don't have a good answer for that question. I do know that there is a lot of work being done in regenerative agriculture. I'm part of a regenerative agriculture network, which is intended to bring together a lot of university collaborators, government agencies, researchers, farmers, ranchers to start formulating what regenerative agriculture is and how can we make it more widely adopted. I think we have two more questions. Which type of crops farms are least likely to adopt your approach to yield optimization, and why? Um, Again, I mean, I would say if there's no economic incentive, I mean, we're doing this for specialty crops. So those are high value crops, and it makes sense to want to know your yield. When it comes to commodity crops, it also makes sense to want to know your yield, because in specialty crops it's more about the money. In commodity crops it's more about food security. I guess. Yeah, I don't know what I can off the top of my head, I can't really think of any crop that wouldn't want to do yield forecasting, unless you're doing some sort of agroforestry. I don't know, maybe if your crop is associated with deforestation like palm oil or cocoa, maybe you want to operate in secret. But we've also been seeing a lot of interest in trying to understand the yield for those crops as well. And I know I've got teammates on the call, so if you guys want to jump in and maybe make a quick comment, I would welcome that as well, for some of these questions that I might not be able to answer. So we've got two more questions. I think the sustainability scorecard, I just lost the question from Diane. Sustainability scorecard is a valuable idea. I think it's an excellent idea. So that's just a comment. Yep. So we've been seeing brands starting to adopt that idea of putting some sort of label on the product, whether it's CO2, but we would love to see that more standardized and more commonly asked for. Gabe has a question. What is your vision for applying these methods and ideas to high quantity crops like corn and soy? So a lot of what we talked about, us being in California and us being focused on specialty crops, that's where our expertise come from. Because of the supply chain of specialty crops, I think if we figure it out for specialty crops, because it's a more opaque market, we can easily apply it to other crops. I mean, our whole idea is start with one crop like almonds, figure it out from end to end, and then easily replicate that in other crops.
Ariane, I wanted to throw out Ronald's question, which I liked. It was, what are some of the infrastructural challenges farmers will face when pivoting into regenerative ag?
So one of the ones that has been top of mind for us was measurement of the improvement. So how do you measure actually how much carbon you're sequestering? Which we talked about different approaches. I mean, right now the only way is to take a soil sample and send it to the lab, which is costly and time consuming. Can be given better tools, whether it's a sensor, whether it's remotely sensed data, to get the same type of information. And then the second challenge with regenerative agriculture is that there are a few practices that everybody knows about, like compost application or cover cropping or no-tilling. But it really depends on the location, on the farm type, on the crop grown. So there's no one go-to information source for, if I'm a grower and I'm interested in regenerative practices, where do I start? Most people just view regenerative practices as like compost application and no-till. But there's a lot more that can be done to promote regenerative agriculture. So I would say information first. So how do you get started? How do you implement these practices? And how do you cheaply, cost effectively, and scalably measure them? Those are the two challenges.
Thank you. And I think we've got time for one more. I'll pick one from this series of questions offered to us here. So yeah, what's the strategy? Why go with specialty crops first? Is it because of the margins? Commodity crops seem to have a larger impact on reducing waste.
Mhm. Yeah, so for us, it's because we started in the yield forecasting business, and a lot of commodity crops, this was already figured out, and so the yield forecast was already being done for them. So we thought we could have a bigger impact just focusing on specialty crops, and us being in California, it made a lot of sense. Yeah. And I'm just going to make a quick comment about my previous experience, which was related to just the energy use for farming and agriculture. We actually noticed that it's a lot easier to get commodity crops on board, or like other lower value crops like potato that's grown outside of California on board, to reduce their energy and implement energy efficiency, because the margins for them was so much lower. And if we were promising them $5 an acre energy savings, they would jump on it and they would do it. If you offer the same incentive to an almond grower in California, because they have a much higher margin, that $5 an acre wasn't really that attractive for them. So definitely, I mean, they're two different universes, but we thought we can start in specialty crops and have a bigger impact there.
Ariane, appreciate it. Thank you so much. I think that'll go ahead and conclude the Q&A so we can move on into the next section of the event. Really appreciate that, all that information that you shared with us. Really, I wanted to also let everyone know, thank you so much for asking such great questions. And what we can do is we can follow up with Bountiful and see if we can get a few more of those questions answered, and then perhaps share them with you via email, perhaps in an upcoming Cleantech Rising newsletter, or just personally via email after the event. So keep an eye out for that. So at this stage, we will be moving into our small group discussion sessions in the breakout rooms. And I'm going to go ahead and put the first discussion prompt into the chat, and then I'll send you all out into the breakout rooms. One thing that I would nudge you all to consider is, if you are one to typically jump in and go first in a scenario like this, maybe consider leaving some space for another individual who may be less likely to jump in first, and kind of see where that takes you. And alternatively, if you are someone who perhaps will often wait, maybe think about jumping in first this time. So the first discussion prompt, I'm going to throw it in the chat here, is: what are some specific things you know about your food's environmental footprint? And what are your knowledge gaps or things you would like to know and understand better? So I'll say it one more time, and then we'll send you into the rooms. So what are some specific things you know about your food's environmental footprint? And what are your knowledge gaps or things you would like to know and understand better? These are going to be 8-minute discussions. So I will be seeing you guys back here in a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and create these rooms now and open them up. And I'll see you all in a little bit. Enjoy in there. Welcome back, everyone. I think everyone's trickling back in here. So at this time, we'd love for you to type into the chat any takeaways, any things that came up, whether it's something you shared or something that was shared by someone in your room that you found interesting. I'll leave a little bit of a moment here for you to kind of formulate a thought. It's really great for all of us to kind of get to see the different things that came up in the other rooms, and again, just an opportunity for us to learn and see things that we couldn't see before. Ariane says, Berkeley Bowl has city of origin on their produce, which is great at engaging customers. Very interesting. So that's a restaurant, I'm assuming?
It's a grocery store in Berkeley.
Oh, it's a grocery store. Very cool. Yeah, it kind of almost makes for an interactive experience, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else?
While everybody's thinking, something that came up in our breakout session, which I think is very interesting, is that food is very cultural and it's much harder to change something that's part of your culture. So that's another challenge when it comes to our food system.
I can absolutely relate with that. I grew up in, my family owned a restaurant growing up for most of my life, just actually sold it like last month. And it was a burger and like a burger restaurant and sandwiches and stuff like that. And as I learned about the carbon intensive situation with meat production, that created quite a tension for me as someone who cares about sustainability. So definitely relate to that cultural element. Gabe says, when thinking about our own food's carbon impact, we felt like we knew broad things like don't eat meat, but specifics were lacking. I'm right there with you. Kevin says, it's difficult to make informed decisions about what to purchase when there's so much uncertainty around its impacts on the environment. Awesome, guys. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. I'm going to go ahead and drop the second breakout prompt into this chat here, and we'll go ahead and break out for the next round. So the next question is, what do you know or what do you want to better understand about the relationship between organic food and sustainability? So once more, what do you know or what do you want to better understand about the relationship between organic food and sustainability? All right, I'm going to send you back out into breakout rooms and I'll see you all back here soon. Welcome back. It looks like we've got just about everyone with us. So what did we think about the relationship between organic food and sustainability? Does anyone want to share in the chat what you guys were talking about? Love to hear your thoughts.
If I could say something to everybody, I guess there is a difference. Maybe a common misconception is that organic farming is sustainable, but those should be kind of treated separately. And yes, they're not, some of the practices of organic farming contribute to the cause of sustainability, but that doesn't mean overall, we're seeing reduced amount of CO2 off gassing. So that was kind of understanding that can happen. That was really shaped, it made me think about organic differently.
Thanks, Christina. Appreciate you sharing that. Laura Lee says it would be great to find a way to make organic farming sustainable. Very much on board with you there. Vivian says, learn that a lot of times growers may not have as much control since they need to sell to larger processors and food companies and don't directly affect the price the customer pays. Interesting. Awesome. Well, we're just a minute away here from the end of our hour. And I guess I'll start to wrap this up for us here. So good to see all of your faces. I've got you on the grid screen. This is awesome. Actually, you know what? At this stage, we typically like to take a quick group photo. If you guys are up for that, can I get a little show of hands? Are we up for a group photo, a screenshot? Everyone all right with that? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and take it. And if you can give me a little wave, I would be awesome. I'm gonna do a shaka because I always like to go with that. All right. Yeah, we got it. Nice. Okay. So thank you all so much for being here today. Just a couple things to wrap up. I want to just say a huge thank you to Mr. Kevin Wallner here in the audience. He has been an all-star at helping me to organize these events, and we're excited to keep it going. We next month are still working out the details, but we are set for our September Cleantech Live, where we're going to be hearing from our friend Nick Doyle on the topic of optical sorting technology, which is used in recycling, and the concept of the circular economy. So we're looking forward to that, and we hope you'll join us, but we will be sending you emails communicating and letting you know the details there. And let's see, I think that's really all I've got. One thing I wanted to do is we're going to hang out for another, let's say 10 or 15 minutes for anyone who would like to. And we're going to throw out one more discussion prompt, and we're going to stay right in this room and just open up the conversation and let anyone who would like to chime in on it kind of do one more round, essentially. One that I can actually be present for, which I'd love. So yeah, so anyone who's can drop off, totally fine. Thank you so much for coming. And then in a moment here, we'll let folks drop out, and then whoever wants to stick around, I'll throw in that final discussion prompt, and we'll have a little bit more to talk about.
Thanks, Cam.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So what do we? You got a third prompt up your sleeve, huh, Cam?
Yes, there's one more prompt. Kelly, we will be posting these on YouTube. So currently on our YouTube channel, there are the recordings of the first two Cleantech Live events. And this one will go up there shortly after, sometime in the next week, we'll get that up there as well. So you can view those, and those will continue to get posted there.
Okay, perfect. And I can't stick around for the third prompt, but this was great. Thank you so much for these. I love them.
So happy that you like it. Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks.
Take care. Cool. All right, so I'm going to throw this final discussion prompt out there. Arian suggested it earlier, but this final question is, will you pay more for food if it's sustainable? If so, how much would you be willing? I'm going to post the question in the prompt here. Would you be willing to pay half as much, twice as much, 3 times as much? Anyone who would like to jump in and share their perspective on that, floor is open.
Are you asking us to chat or just?
Yes, yeah, Laura, you're more than welcome to share your perspective on it. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, well, I was going to say, you know, actually I raised this a little earlier with our little chat group. I personally would be prepared to pay more, but I think it's such a matter of income and, you know, where you are in terms of how much you earn and what you can afford. So it's tricky. I think most of us, particularly from a health perspective, if it's food that one is considered, you know, it's trending, it's healthier for you than this, I think most of us would like to do that, or at least, I think the other part of that too is if you know that it's being grown safely and with all the best interests in the world for mankind, I think might be more prepared to pay for it. But I do see the challenges in that, and I don't know how you're going to get around that. But yeah, I would pay more. I do.
Thank you. Appreciate you sharing that.
I would say for myself, I feel like in the last 10 years of my life have sort of paid more than I could at a bare minimum for food. And sometimes I guess it's more on the organic side, and even that should be taken loosely. I pay more for, or at least shop at places where I can get food that I believe is healthier for myself and not coming from a place where animals are mistreated and I have kind of ethical concerns. And that might mean just shopping at Whole Foods,
Yeah.
you know, and because it is more expensive to shop there. And I almost blindly trust Whole Foods to be the curator of higher quality foods. But I think that my focus has really been more on what's organic or kind of healthy for me. I don't have any source that I can trust that would be able to help me make conscious decisions about food that's better for the environment as well. So I'm willing to pay more, I guess, to answer the question, and I kind of already do, but it's blindly paying for what I believe but don't really know is a better choice.
I would agree with you. That's what I'm doing.
I think you bring up a good point, Kevin. I think like trust is really the key thing here. And like, yeah, I'm a college student. I pay the bare minimum for food that I can. And like, you know, yeah, so I think that that's a point in my life. And, you know, like obviously things will change, but also I think that in order for me to pay more for food, I would want to, I need to build trust, and I need to have trust in either the certification, right? Or, you know, another way to do that is build trust locally and build, you know, trust. I think I talked with Christina a bit about like a CSA, like a local farm that distributes directly, you know, most of their food directly to the shoppers and consumers, right? And like in that sort of situation, I have far more trust for them, or you know, and I'm gonna trust them to be doing, you know, when I say, hey, like, are you doing organic? That, you know, I'm going to trust them to do that. Hey, are you like thinking about fertilizer, and are you thinking about, you know, how you can best support your soil in the off season? You know, and I think another thing with that is like that doesn't have to be necessarily so small. You know, I think like my school has relationships with a dairy farm and a, you know, local farms that are within the kind of 100-mile radius of us, and I would trust those farms way more because I know their names and I know kind of, you know, I know where it is. I can point to it on a map. I can say, hey, that's where like my milk this afternoon came from. As opposed to when I go to a grocery store, I'm really like in the price mindset, and I'm really like, you know, I'm price shopping. And I think that if I say, oh, like I'm going to make a choice to pay more, it's probably going to be because of the knowledge or the connection or the trust that I have in a farm. Yeah.
I think another thing that I've kind of considered and done a little bit accidentally, also being price conscious, is like shopping more seasonally. So I think even with the bigger producers, right, like some of the stuff's just going to be cheaper in the summer versus the winter or whatnot. So maybe that's like a way, again, like for more price conscious people, you can kind of influence that. Or even if it like it's seasonal, so it's cheaper than the norm anyways, but maybe you could bump up that price a little bit because, you know, you have a little bit of buffer there. But I kind of do echo what everyone's saying, like that idea of like shopping maybe at smaller stores, but still being a little bit price conscious with the seasonal stuff is what I've kind of gravitated towards recently.
And how about breaking that barrier that I've commonly seen as well? If your fruit or vegetable doesn't look pretty, you wouldn't purchase it. You know, kind of how would you like culturally just defeat that barrier? If it looks a little deformed, I mean, it's okay. It's still a vegetable. You know, it's still gonna have the same properties. But having said that, you know, might just, I mean, then probably you would consume more, you know, because there's going to be more folks that wouldn't care, but then there's going to be a large market of folks that really do care. So how would you just, and doesn't at the end of
Yeah, maybe taking the consumer closer to the farm, because I mean, I think one of the points that Gabe also mentioned ties into this, that at the grocery store first, you don't know, like you're trusting the grocery store. You're so far removed from the farm and everything at the grocery store looks perfect. But then if you establish the connection, become closer to the farm and buy directly from them, it's easier to trust them. And then you also see that it comes from a farm that's not perfect. Not everything is as clean and as like symmetric as you get it at the grocery store. So I think that's a huge thing. But I mean, personally for myself, I am willing to pay more, but how much I'm willing changes and it's very elastic. So I tend to spend more if I go to a farmer's market or if I'm at one of these fruit stands on the side of the road next to a farm, because that gives me the feel that I'm actually getting the right thing. Also, I've seen myself pay more when things are gamified, when I'm doing a certain type of diet, or I mean, I can draw parallels to the energy world where these apps where you can sign up to like reduce your energy and you get like a few cents every time you do that, and you avoid a peaker plant from going online. So maybe if I showed you guys my carbon footprint of my food, so if I pledge that I'm going to cut it in half in a year and I keep track of my food carbon footprints, that's gamification, and I might go out of my way and pay more to reach my goals and to set the climate pledge that I have. So it's how much I'm willing to pay, but how much I'm willing to pay, it really depends on the situation.
I kind of have an interesting question, because trust is something that, like in almost everyone's answer at some level, was kind of part of the critical component in order to either like agree to buy something that's more expensive or to justify paying more for a sustainable product or an organic product. And trust is like, that's an interesting idea that in some ways, whenever we have like a direct relationship with a person, we are immediate to trust, right? Like if you meet the farmer and you meet them at their place, or you see where it's located on their map, and you know where it is, like you just immediately trust. At the retail level, or like in the store, when you don't have those opportunities, how, as like individuals buying food every day, how do you think about interacting and trusting the items that you're buying as them being good? Does it only come through a certification or a verification? Does it come through like brand recognition through other people? Like how do you think about that idea of trust? Because it seems like that in some ways might be the true hurdle of like establishing trust in sustainable food. And how do we make that happen?
I think that's a fantastic question, and I want to hear other people's answers, but I'm just going to kind of start off to say that when Gabe was talking about as a college student, which we all were or are at this time, when you go into the store, it's like a war zone. You're like you're thinking like a very price conscious consumer, and you're susceptible to the marketing and branding tactics of each individual packager and company or whatever products behind that, but also the way that the store's merchandise is. So the store is really a difficult place to make conscious decisions, and trust is almost built really strange in a weird, almost like unnatural way. So I'm going to point that out, and I'm also going to say that personally, I think that there are a few things that get if a brand or if a farm is able to establish that direct connection with the consumer, if the trust is there and it's warranted, it almost starts to make going to the grocery store a little less important. If I could get the essentials through subscriptions from these farms or businesses' websites, I might never walk into a grocery store again. But
one question that came to my mind are there any other trust markers? So I think the ones we have so far are a certification, a brand, and like local. Are there any other trust markers that we can think of that influence our decisions on this thing?
Media.
Where it's sold.
The store.
Yeah, I think there are some stores that you just, because of who they are and because of, we have one locally that I would trust them. Now, it's not to say that I'm not being foolish about it, but I have a sense from how they operate their customer service. They're small. It's the little things that they do that make me think, okay, you are worth taking that leap of faith. And the chances are, well, I mean, in one instance, they actually stopped selling a particular brand of chicken from a particular farm because they found that something wasn't right. So, based on that, I think it was I have trust in them. I have faith in them.
I think another thing is social. Like if my friend says, yeah, like I like the, whether it's like I like the taste of this or I like, whatever this brand, I trust this brand. Also, like growing up, like, there's the brand of almonds that we would always buy, or there's the brand of whatever. And now I go to a store and I see that same packaging, or I see that same kind of thing with any like household product. I like gravitate towards that, and it takes another kind of mental step and like bit of energy to think, oh, actually, like I don't like the shampoo, or like I don't like the whatever type of, I'd rather buy this type of broccoli or whatever. Broccoli's not a good example, but you get what I mean.
Yeah.
I think it came up in our breakout session. Zoe mentioned that media played a big role in convincing people that milk alternatives are better. There was no certification. There was nothing on that. It was just media pushing people towards like oat milk or almond milk or other types of milk products.
Yeah, and that's just that takes time for society to come around. But in the case of Bountiful, for example, if you're doing that for years and years, and then society comes around, you're going to become the Patagonia, right? You're going to become the North Face, because there's like this cult following, and you've been doing the same thing since decades ago.
Right.
And then I think that there's just the information, getting the information out there, and that spreading and becoming part of the zeitgeist. And then there's also policy and governmental involvement, which for organic, like for example, like I'm willing to pay way more. I'm pescatarian, and I'm willing to pay way more. Like I went to a Dodger game. Also, any Bay Area Giants fans come at me. Dodger game, and they were like 12. That's right. $12 like Beyond Meat Dodger dog, which is like $3 or $4 for the regular, which is like 4x for the same product. So, but I'm willing to pay that, but primarily because it affects me. Our whole issue as climate solution is that it's this amoebus problem that, like, I don't know, it's $1 more, but it doesn't really affect me. Like, so that's where the policy and governmental action needs to come into play. The EV industry wouldn't exist if it wasn't for $7,500 you get back from the federal government for an EV purchase from California, or vice versa, actually. But yeah, so I think getting the government involved, I think carbon pricing is super important. I think the ag industry needs to be best friends with the carbon pricing folks, the carbon markets that are developing now.
If it was if sustainability, so to that same point, like organic food feels personal, right? Like as so many people said earlier, like I buy organic because I know it's good for me, right? Sustainability doesn't always feel good for me. It feels good for the environment and for everybody else. So I would almost, I want to pose a question back to that statement. And like, if it felt personal, or if it was me or you as individuals, would that government requirement still be required and needed if the individual kind of idea was so strongly aligned with sustainability, like we think of organic, for example?
I think if you were able to do that, then you wouldn't need government involvement as much. I don't know how you do that if you figure it out.
Yeah. We'll be looking to figure that out in parallel to also looking at government action as well.
Yeah. Well, good stuff, everyone. Did anyone have any last comments before we kind of wrap up?
Yeah, I'd like to say something.
Go ahead, Cameron.
Okay, thanks. I was just going to say, to me, it feels so inherently wrong and disappointing that we even need to be having a conversation about paying more for sustainable food, because I feel like if something is good for the earth and good for people, then it should be cheaper to everyone. And it's disappointing that we even have to be talking about paying more for something that does good for like all parties involved. And I like you guys were saying earlier, that the government, like, I think the government needs to be involved in subsidizing the foods that are actually good for people and good for the environment. And it's crazy that like they're subsidizing things that aren't good for that. So I think, yeah, policy is a huge part of it. And hopefully there's a point where we don't have to have this conversation about paying more for things that are good for us and good for the world. That's all.
Very, very much relate to that. It's funny, it reminds me of a question that Ning posed earlier, which was like, what would it take to have sustainable produce low enough such that it's like the more economical option and the premium wouldn't be necessary? That sounds like the $1 million maybe billion-dollar question. But I think on that note, it's possibly time to wrap up here. And yeah, thank you all so much for being with us. It's so good to hear your voices and see your faces, and a lot of interesting things to think about after this. Ariane, you're the man. Thank you so much. And everyone at Bountiful team that joined us, stoked that you could make it here. And I hope that this was in some way helpful for you and your understanding of kind of consumer behavior and feelings and thoughts around this topic. And yeah, we're going to be doing this next month, so I hope that you'll all join us again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.